Welcome, traveler. Please come in. Come in. Leave your coats and your boots by the door. We'll take care of them. We'll make sure they get looked after. The wait staff will be with you shortly to bring you a drink. But in the meantime, if you want to come and sit down with us, I was actually about to regale these fine folks with tales of my own adventures, the places I've traveled, the faces I've seen, and the monsters I've slain. I've seen quite a rich life myself, actually. So why don't you join us? I'm sure at least one of my stories will entertain you while you wait for yours. Hello, my name is Connar, and welcome to the very first, technically first episode of the Champions Way podcast. I finally have a name for this thing, for this little thing I'm doing. It's nice. It's nice to have a thing. It's nice to have a name. I have got a really bad track record with keeping consistent on things like this. So hopefully now that I've got a name for it, it'll be okay. We're on track. For those wondering, the Champions Way used to be a Facebook and then eventually a Discord group that I ran. I've created it and moderated it to help me keep connected with all my role-playing game friends. So people who play Dungeons and Dragons and the like. They, like wait for them to share homebrews and their characters and their stories. And it was nowhere near as active as I would liked it to have been, but I can't force my friends to partake in the activities I want them to. It's not like I'm still bitter about that or anything. I'm not bitter. I swear. Here we are, Champions Way podcast. Hopefully there isn't actually a podcast out there called this, because if there is, I do have a backup plan. Champions Way Tavern podcast, because that was the full name of the group. So I, can fall back on that, because I guarantee there wouldn't be a Champions Way Tavern podcast. It's just, there can't be. I really hope there isn't. There are so many podcasts in the world. So many. Actually, I wonder if you took all the podcasts in the world and combined their entire length, how long would that be? Like, how much time would it be to listen to every single episode of every single podcast ever? Like, longer than a human lifespan, right? Like at this point, right? It'd have to be. There's just so much out there. So, what are we doing today, you might be wondering? Well, I thought if I was going to have a podcast named after essentially a Dungeons and Dragons themed group that I ran on Facebook, I would today talk about Dungeons and Dragons, because I really haven't had the chance to do that in any extensive or explorative manner on YouTube yet, not on this channel or even my own channel that I used to have. So why not use this opportunity now? Let's talk about what got me into Dungeons and Dragons. What was my first role-playing game? Who was my first character? The impact different games had on me, that sort of stuff. I thought it'd be really fun to actually explore that, and it was fun for me to personally sit down and go, what games have I been a part of, and what have I done in that time? And yeah, I've done a lot of role-playing games, because I've literally been doing it since I was 10 years old, and I am closer to 25 than I am 24 now, so almost 15 years. A decade and a half of this. So yeah, there's a lot of stories I can share, and I'm not going to remember all of them because I don't have like a back catalogue of all of them. I wish I did. I wish I had the foresight or the energy to have a book or something where I catalogued every single thing that I did role-playing wise, because it'd be so cool to look back and see all that, and I just don't. Before we get into that, however, I do have something I want to share that was a little bit unexpected. So there is a very lovely gentleman who works at one of my local zing pop cultures, and me and him, we have had extensive conversations about Marvel, collecting, action figures, collectibles, and actually also Dungeons and Dragons. And at one point in time, after talking about board games and Dungeons and Dragons, he mentioned he had a book. And this is a copy of his book. That is really poor on the lighting there. Is it going to be better if I get closer a little? That is the book. Right, there's the book cover. He did the cover himself. The book is called Salvation, Act 1, Prophecies. The first act in a 3-act tale set in the Dimension verse. It is my kind of nonsense by the sounds of things. It's fair to see, pure and simple. It's seems to be rooted a lot in, like, you know, the sort of typical, I'm not sure what you'd call it, but like the Christian Catholic biblical mythology. So you know, there's stuff about heaven, angels, demons. You know, there's an elite group of demons known as the 7 deadly sins. And the main story seems to be centered around changing one's fate and changing one's own destiny and fighting against the machinations of a future that has been set in stone. And I think that is really fun, mostly because the idea of fate realistically is terrifying, but it is a fun basis for a fantasy book. So I haven't had a chance to read this yet, and I don't know how long it'll take me because I'm not an avid novel reader, and there's 594 pages. That's a lot of pages. My word, this is a 3-part series too. I don't know how long an average novel actually is, but this is a thick boy. It's a weighty boy. So yeah, picked this up from him because he said he'd bring a copy to show me, and he did. And I asked him how much for a copy, and he said because there's actually a printing error on the side here. Hard to see in that lighting, but the spine should be a little bit more over this way. Yeah, he gave it to me for technically nothing at the moment. I haven't paid him. I just told him I would give him the money for it when I saw him next, and he said, "Oh, okay, cool. Boom, here you go." What a gentleman, lovely, trusting human being, and I promise his trust will not be misplaced. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you can actually buy copies of this book online, which if you can, there will be a link to where you can get it here and probably in the description and the comments below, shouting out a absolute gentleman, a lad, and yeah, hopefully this is worth the read. But that is not for me to judge, that is for you to judge. If you get your hands on this book, you read a copy of it, you like what you read, that's for you to decide. Me personally, I'm probably going to like it because it does sound like my kind of nonsense. So yeah, all right. Without further ado, let's get on to what this podcast was originally meant to be. Just going to take a quick drink because talking hurts. This is a little lovely ale mug my mum got me from the actual Hobbit town, from actual honest to God New Zealand that she went and visited when she went over there for softball, and I haven't been able to visit her yet. So I'm jealous still, and actually even more fun. It's an ale mug. This is the first time I'm drinking any form of ale out of it. It is ginger ale, not an alcoholic ale, not an actual beer or anything. It's essentially a soft drink, but you know, fun little facts. History making right here, ale in an ale mug. All right, so why did I start playing role-playing games? When did I start role-playing games? Well, like I said, when I was about 10 years old, my friend, who I will refer to by his screen name, Demonic Incursion, he brought me over to his house one day and showed me it was like a toolbox, essentially. Like a case, it was like a drill case almost. Clipped it open and flipped up, and there was all these minis, like little minis and dice, and he was like, "This is my dad's Dungeons and Dragons stuff." And I'm like, "What is Dungeons and Dragons?" And he explained it to me, and I was like, it's like a video game that you play with paper and pencil, and you use these minis to represent the character." And I was like, "So it's a game that uses a lot of imagination?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "But you get to make your own character." He's like, "Yeah, you can do that." I'm like, "Okay, that's really cool. Can we play Dungeons and Dragons?" And he's like, "Sure, yeah, we can play Dungeons and Dragons." We didn't play Dungeons and Dragons. We played a homebrew game that we essentially kept calling Dungeons and Dragons. We didn't play like 3rd edition or 3.5 or 4th edition or anything at the time. We played a homebrew that Demonic Incursion had created. And I don't know how well like balancing wise it is because we're 10. And I don't think we have a copy of any of his system anymore. But it was fun. I remember it being a lot of fun. I remember loving playing that initial game, which is, I guess, a huge part of the reason why I'm still playing role-playing games today. He dungeon mastered, but also made a character because we were doing just, me and him playing. It was just us, so he dungeon mastered and was a player at the same time. We managed that somehow. And he made a necromancer. Which he just literally called it after his own name. I, on the other hand, my first character, his name was Canis Forscar, and he was a Lycan, like an underworld type, Rise of the Lycans styled Lycan. He had all he could control his transformations and all these abilities about like summoning wolves and increasing the damage he does with his claws and setting his claws on fire to do fire damage and all that really like nonsensical stuff that is like peak. Like you look back and you go like, oh, that is so lame. But we were so enjoying those games and we loved those characters and we loved the stories we told with those characters. And it was the greatest story ever told as far as we were concerned at the time. So, look back at it now with a bit of a, oh, okay, wow. Canis Forscar, the Lycan, who can summon packs of wolves with fiery claws. Cool, that's something else. But to us, that was the best thing ever. And it obviously must have had an impact because it inspired us to spend the rest of our lives playing role-playing games. So eventually, my friend got sick of being the only dungeon master between the two of us, as is the case for every dungeon master. Eventually, you just want to be a player. And my friend, within a year, basically was like, could you dungeon master a game? And I said, sure. And then for like half a year, I didn't. And he's like, okay, are you going to dungeon master a game or not? And I eventually went, fine, give me a week. So I went about trying to make something a bit different than he had done. I wanted a quest line centered around a core villain, like a BBEG, but specifically just for this game. This BBEG character, I wanted to make a character that I could really sink my teeth into and get really like hammy and intense and wild with. So I created a demonic jester called Dimitri. Now, I didn't know this at the time of designing him. I literally drew Dimitri, and I didn't know this at the time. But I looked back at the drawings and at the character design and some of the elements of the character and realized I had taken elements of my favorite supervillains from comics and threw it all together. So I borrowed Two-Face's halfway design. Dimitri had half a mask and half a face. I borrowed obviously elements from the Joker, as you can imagine, with that big smile, the most famous and beloved evil clown in pop culture. I also took elements from my personal favorite supervillain, the Green Goblin. I took almost entirely his costume from the neck down. So I'm talking the belt, I'm talking the gloves that come down to here, I'm talking the boots that curl at the end. And it all worked really well for a jester. Rather than scale mail on his arms and his legs, Dimitri had like tights, and they were like diamonds, like diamond patterns, white and black. And his colors outside of the white and black were red and blue, which I don't know why I went red and blue. I just did. I knew red because it's striking, it's intense. I guess I don't know why I went blue. I think it was like in my head, red and blue are like opposites in a weird way, which they're not. But like you play like a video game, like Halo, it's red team, blue team. There's a lot of red and blue battling each other out there in the world in pop culture. So Dimitri's character was that he was a dark elf, and he was actually a jester in his life, and he was blamed for the assassination of a drow princess, and he was left out to dry. A brutal torture method invented by the drow, where he literally hung from the rooftops and slowly but surely died out there. And he was so angered by his betrayal at the hands of the royalty that he had served for so long that he returned as a demonic entity and took over the castle and the kingdom and turned all the people into his twisted jester slaves. And the king and the queen and all their royal servants, they were fused into a wailing wall that constantly cried out in pain. And the closer you got to the castle, the louder the screams of agony were. They were music to Dimitri's ears. He loved the sound of the betrayals, pained screams. I had a lot of fun. As an 11-year-old with a twisted sense of the world, I enjoyed making that character so much. Eventually, I went to high school in this time. I moved high schools, and a group of friends that I found at this new high school were all interested in playing D&D. Now, I was originally going to run a homebrew version of D&D for all these people, but I ended up sick for a week, and they had all came to the conclusion that they would actually buy D&D 4E, I believe it was. I believe it's 4E. Yeah, it was 4E because I played the Dragonborn. They, one of the other players decided he would Dungeon Master, buy all the assets, like, buy the books and whatnot, and just run D&D proper. Which, I was like, all right, I was a little angry that I was no longer Dungeon Master, but whatever. I got to play Dungeons and Dragons proper. And it lasted 2 sessions. That was so, yeah. Yeah. It was something. So the 2 sessions, no, 3 actually. I might have misspoke. Not very many sessions. But my initial character was a Dragonborn named Scar. Scar, he was a black Dragonborn, and I believe that it was acid. He was breathing acid breath, because that is super cool. A black scaled giant lizard man in plate armor with a sword and a shield, he's just breathing acid. That is so cool. How could I not play that? So I played that, and then later on in the game, we get trapped inside a one of those rooms where the walls are closing in to crush us. And everyone's trying to get out of there, break out, do something to survive. We look like we're on the brink of a TPK. And I believe it was our druid who shapeshifted into a fish and hid inside the bag of holding. Just like, no, I'm out. I'm done. Bye. See ya. Fish bag. So, yeah. He pieced out, and that was like, well, he's not going to be of any use. Let's try and get out of here. And Scar's immediate response was to screw it. That's the door that's locked on us. Cool. Ran headfirst into it. Bang! Didn't do anything because the door was made of metal, and Scar's head is made of flesh and bone. So Scar went bang, bang, and was out. Yeah. He woke up screaming in pain. Someone get me an aspirin, which was, given that this is a fantasy setting, and I think aspirins were a thing back then, so not really suiting. But again, I think at this point we were like 14, 15, and, none of us really were like the experienced storytellers for role-playing games that we could be now. We didn't really have, our immediate response was to do something that was funny or cool, not necessarily that helped tell the best story or was relating best to our characters. Even the dungeon masters at the time were like a little shaky on storytelling, which is fair enough. We're not meant to be great storytellers when this is our first proper D&D game. So yeah, it was just a silly 3 sessions. Eventually we started again, and I played a character called Titus, who was this tall, powerful paladin. He was a paladin, and we kind of fluffed his paladin abilities as being him being a death knight, like he was once a paladin, but he had yet passed away, and he was a vengeful, angry death knight who had committed some horrible sin, which is why he did not pass into the realm of heaven. But hell would not accept him, so he was forced to walk the earth forevermore. And yeah, he was just a big, strong guy. That at one point I got a crit hit on a goblin with no hit points, so he was atomized. He went, the axe went down, and both sides of the goblin went, and that was that. That's my one major memory from that specific game. Titus will actually return in a later game that I play, but at this point in time, I believe D&D kind of dried up for me a little bit. We didn't do a lot of role-playing games at this point. It was like nearing the end of high school, I believe, actually, so people didn't have much time. People were starting to get jobs. And yeah, it just was an awkward time to get a party together. So we didn't really do much D&D or any role-playing games at that specific time. A couple of years later, though, we played a Warhammer 40k based RPG, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's Warhammer 40k, so I imagine the word dark or heresy is in there. So, work off that. We played 2 games. The game 1 was 6 sessions long, and I played a character named Torg, who was from a savage world. And this was an idiot who spoke with like that Tarzan speak, like, oh god, I can do his voice. Torg. No one told Torg about this. Why are you laughing at Torg? Torg has done nothing wrong. Kind of like Drax the Destroyer, but he spoke in third person. Not much came of that particular campaign. There was a moment where we almost started a panic because someone mentioned that Tyranids might be involved in what we were doing, which was a terrible idea. That went really poorly, but we were able to contain that mess. There was one moment that caused the table to break out into laughter, which will not actually be all that funny in retelling the story, but in the moment, things happen, and it seems so funny because you're in the moment and the context of the situation makes sense. So Torg was very much out of place. Everyone else was like a very intelligent or very wily type character in the team, and as a part of our job, we had to go to a fancy dress ball, essentially. And no one wanted Torg there because Torg could not do subtle. And he would certainly bring attention to himself, and they did not want that. So no one actually told him what they were going to do, that there was a fancy dress ball or anything. They were going to try and keep it secret from him and try and keep him away from it all, which I thought was funny enough for me not to be upset as a player. So I played along until it was let slip in front of him. And I looked to the player as Torg, and I went, you didn't tell me. You didn't tell Torg that there was a fancy dress dance going on. Torg is a great dancer. Torg will come, and Torg will make sure things don't go wrong. And the player turns to Torg and goes, well, Torg, look, we need things to be subtle. We need to go, things to be quiet. Well, the Torg will go very quietly. And for some reason, that line, Torg will go very quietly, said in the loudest whisper possible, made everyone at the table laugh. It was this eventual punchline to a joke that no one knew they were telling. And those kinds of moments really help reinforce why I love role-playing games. Moments like that where things are so cool or so funny, and just reminiscing about those kinds of things reminds me why I'm still playing role-playing games today. Not because I ever forget why, but it's just like I go, man, that's such a memory. There was such a moment of pure joy shared by everyone. So yeah, I'll always remember that little story, even though it will never have the effect of making anyone else laugh, because it doesn't really have the same impact when you're not there in that moment. But then we played another Warhammer 40k game, and we lost one session, and it was because me and one of the other players were like, we do not want to be a part of this. Because session one, the dungeon master, or okay, the games master, I should say, because it's not Dungeons and Dragons, the games master insisted that the first session, the entire 4 hours of the first session, be devoted to imperial bureaucracy. We were doing paperwork. We were signing our name. We were reading rules and regulations and guidelines and waiting in line to talk to bureaucrats. We were literally doing the most boring possible thing, all of which could have been left to the pre-game or the prologue or the prelude, or just as a asset out of the game with explanation. You go through all the rules and regulations and you sign all these papers, and you are now fully signed off as having authority in this situation. And it was not the case. We didn't do it like that. We just sat through it and did it in real time. And it was the most boring, frustrating, mind-numbing thing I think I've done. It's probably the worst session of any role-playing game I've ever played, because that was just so purely the most boring thing ever. At least like a bad session, as far as like a bad story, can at least provide some joy. This, however, could provide nothing. And it was like, oh no. Okay. So yeah, that was terrible. And I haven't played a Warhammer 40k RPG since, not because of avoidance, but just because it's never come up again. I've also played Shadowrun. Actually, I've played Shadowrun. I played, I want to say, one game of Shadowrun. And it was across about 4 sessions. Not much happened. I don't even remember my character. I do remember how we were that for some. I don't know why I don't remember anything. I remember my character, the story, what we were doing. But I remember one thing, and that was that playing this game taught me what terminal velocity was. See, I didn't know what terminal velocity was. And at one point in time, we're fighting on this massive skyscraper, and my character beats an NPC off the side of the building. And I turn to the GM and I go, is he dead? And the GM rolls a dice. So, yeah, no, he doesn't grab onto anything. He just falls. And he's going to hit the ground and take a lot of damage, so he's dead. I'm like, how far did he just fall? And the DM was like, well, I don't know, but I'd have to say he's probably hit terminal velocity because we're pretty high up. And I'm like, what is terminal velocity? So I Googled it, and then I was like, I did the math, and I'm like, how high is this building? And he's like, yeah, it is. It's like, oh yeah, he hit terminal velocity about 10 stories before he hit the ground. So that was neat. A violent, horrifying demise for this poor soul. And I also played a Star Wars game at one point. So 2 campaigns, and if you're seeing a trend, we played a lot of things that did not stick because we were experimenting with so much. All right, us as nerds, our experimentation, our college years was just different role-playing game systems, and different characters, and different GMing styles, which was still exciting to us. So, but yeah, we played some Star Wars games. So my first character was a little 3-foot-tall fluffy creature. And I want you to essentially imagine Momo from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I want you to imagine that with overalls and a laser pistol. He was also force sensitive, just to add to the nonsense that was his character. He was an engineer. He fixed the ship and fixed equipment and drove the ship sometimes. I want you to imagine, like, the thought in my head was this tiny little lemur thing crawling through air vents and ducts and putting wires together, and essentially Rocket Raccoon in that sense. But he was small and he was cute. He was well mannered, and so nothing like Rocket Raccoon's personality. And that was fun. I got to shoot off my little laser pistol a few times. I shot a few people. That was fun. But nothing of any substance really came of those games. My second character, when we played bad guys instead of good guys, I don't remember his name. I remember he was a 4-armed alien, and I'm pretty sure it was Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith, but I'm pretty sure Attack of the Clones. The diner that Obi-Wan Kenobi went to, the guy in charge of the diner, he had the apron on, the greasy, he had the forearms. That's that species of alien. I could have looked it up, but I guess I couldn't be bothered. But that species of alien, and he was a pirate captain, or at least sort of. He and the other guy who claimed to be the pirate captain, who was played by another player, and we were in charge of these pirates called the Blood Maggots, or the Skull Maggots, or we argued constantly about what the name was, but Maggots was in the title. That's all we knew. I was personally called Blood Maggots. Anyway, the other captain, or the second in command as far as my character is concerned, was also a cannibal. So that was some dark stuff. If you just want to have some dark stuff thrown your way, we were teenagers. So we constantly liked making things either sillier or cooler or darker than it really needed to be. So yeah, and that's all I really remember was the characters. I also actually remember at one point in time I was not involved for about a half an hour while we were playing this game. I got so bored that I actually went and made myself a chicken schnitzel. I went and made myself a chicken schnitzel. I put it in the deep fryer. No, not the deep fryer, the air fryer. I believe we had the air fryer at the time. Cut it into slices, put it in a wrap with like mayo and lettuce and tomato and all that, and ate that at the table. And just putting it out there, don't excuse yourself to go and make yourself dinner while you're doing role-playing games, or at the very least, do it politely and make sure everyone at the table is actually kosher with it. Or, alternatively, if you're hungry, go, hey, can we take a break? Can we go get some food? Maybe order some pizza? Because it really, really ruffles feathers when you just make dinner in the middle of the game. I didn't realize that at the time because we were at my house and I thought it was okay. And it wasn't. It just they weren't overly upset, but I could tell that they were just like, really, man? Like you couldn't wait an hour? So yeah, fun little thing you shouldn't do if you're playing D&D. Don't just get up and make dinner, especially when you've got guests at your house and you don't offer them food. That is something you shouldn't do. Speaking of people who do things they shouldn't do, I also played a homebrew that one of my friends made. This is not Demonic Incursion, who I started D&D with. No, this was a different homebrew with a different set of friends. We played a few games of that, and the character I made for that was a rebranded, reimagined version of Titus, my character from a couple of games ago. And Titus, I had come to sort of make him less of a Death Knight, more just a big, strong dude with like no real moral complexity and poor ethical decision making. His first act upon arriving in this new town by a boat was to look at this shady guy that he'd become friends with, who was another one of the players' characters. I looked at this shady guy. There was one of my other players, one of my fellow players' characters, and I was like, "Hey, you see that over there? That's a wishing gun. Only one gun around here. You steal, I'll distract him." Titus went over, used his massive body to body block the guard and take his attention away by asking, like, "Hey man, I'm new to this town. Can you tell me where everything is?" And this other dude's off getting his feet wet, stealing all the coins that children are from using this wishing well. So he was, little fun things like that. Later on, they completed a quest. They got rewarded with a bunch of jewels that Titus sold to a black market dealer and got a good amount of gold from it. He did not want to share that gold, so his idea was to sell the jewels, take the gold, most of it in his bag, put a handful of it in his hands, and then look at the wall, make sure no one was looking, and then put his hand in the wall and go bang and break his nose. His nose wasn't broken; it was just bloody and kind of like messed up. But he did this, limped back to the party, and went, "This is all I got." And they were like, "What happened?" I'm like, "Nothing." And they were like, "Titus, what happened? You hurt?" And I was like, "I got mugged. There were more of them than me. I didn't see it coming." They slapped my head against the wall and took took the coin purse. This fell out of the purse, so this is all I got from my pay. Sorry, I gave them all the gold, and all the players knew that Titus had done his thing. None of the characters did, so they had to role play that they didn't realize what had happened because none of them succeeded on any sort of insight check. And the players after the game, I was like, "Are you guys okay with what I just did as Titus?" And they were like, "Yeah, we're cool." Because we're getting to that point where we're maturing as players and getting less and less offended by each other's actions in game, which is something that can totally happen. People get really invested in role playing and then they get frustrated with each other's characters or with situations that would be naturally, inherently, quite frustrating. So, they were like, "Yeah, no, that's cool, man." Because they already had an idea of the type of person Titus was. And it was more like "Oh, man, we let him be in charge of the reward" type moment. So that was fun. Another fun thing about that game actually was that one of my other friends, she was playing a halfling archer, and we established this tactic where Titus was like the tank, and she was actually up on his shoulder. Kind of like Groot and Rocket Raccoon, which is the second time Rocket Raccoon's been mentioned in the video. Funny. But yeah, like Groot and Rocket Raccoon from you've got that visual of Groot fighting off and Groot there with his hands in melee and Rocket's just on top of there with a gun firing off that, but like imagine a knight in black armor and a little halfling ranger going pew, pew, pew. So that was charming. It was charming to me more than anything, and I remember it quite fondly as being quite charming. Now, after a few years, we finally come to my first time dungeon mastering 5e. Took some time off, and finally I'm here. And I was nervous, but I felt like I had enough experience and seen all the good things and the bad things that several other dungeon masters had done. I need to do this right. And I just knew that there were other people at the table who knew the rules better than me, and I specifically said to them, "Look, I'm going to get some of the rules wrong. I'm going to ask you for clarification throughout the game. I'm going to focus on the storytelling and the general running of the game, if you can help me with that." And they were like, yeah, that's cool, dude. First session went off without a hitch. There was one issue where our paladin didn't really know any of his verbal commands to any of his spells, so at one point in time he just screamed, "By the power of Grayskull!" Which, that was not a chant, a war cry that lasted. It didn't suit the character specifically, was the other thing. But yeah, that was just off the top of his head that we could think of at the moment. So, he was not ready for us to be like, "Well, you've got a verbal command in there. Do you have a verbal command?" So, quick tip, if you're a wizard or a spellcaster or anyone like that, either prepare a set of generic verbal commands for your spells or describe your character doing. He does his verbal command, his voice screams up high as his spell hits its peak, and then he launches and whatever. You try and mow over it. I try and ignore that you have to come up with a verbal command. Either like address that a verbal command was made and just walk past it, or come up with a generic list of verbal commands. That would be my advice because it's going to come up. This game devolved into a lot of characters dying or disappearing. First character who died or disappeared, one character disappeared because she just didn't involve herself in the story. The player decided the character didn't want anything to do with the main quest, and she walked off in session 2. That was incredibly frustrating. I was like, "Well, you're gonna have to make another character because this character is clearly buggered off somewhere else, right?" Then that player's brother was captured by a cult, and although he could be saved, the players took the direct path towards him dying. Like he got killed by the cult. So that was thing. And the thing is, when you put in session 1, when you're using characters who are mercenaries essentially, they have no emotional connection. Most of them don't have any moral intent. Putting their lives in each other's hands for sometimes is like basically saying, all right, which player is going to die in session 1, because there's no reason for them to be emotionally connected or have any reason to save each other. Oh, died? Well, I guess that means more money from me when we complete the quest. You know, is the best you're gonna get, really. So that's something as a DM I learned. When you have morally ambiguous or cruel or evil or money-hungry characters who don't care for each other's well-being, don't force them into situations where they are more guaranteed to die if the characters don't make the right decisions. Don't avoid potentially lethal combat, but stuff like having one of them captured by a cult and the players having to make a decision that will save their lives. That is never going to go right. Ever going to go right. Then the player who had a character who walked off from the party decided they were going to make a particularly racist elf who started spouting racist comments about Dragonborn in front of the Dragonborn cleric, who had a temper. So the Dragonborn cleric just kind of whacked the elf and killed him. We had a party kill. And as a DM, the unfortunate problem that you run into sometimes is that I felt like I couldn't force their hand in that situation. I felt like if I forced them not to kill each other, I'd be taking the power of choice away from my players. As a Dungeon Master today, I would totally use the power of the Dungeon Master to avoid a character death, because I felt that was especially in only the second session of having this new character, that was something that I would not go with. I would rather have time with these characters and learn and develop and help. If your players make strange or immature decisions, sometimes you as a Dungeon Master, it's gonna sound bad, you as a Dungeon Master kind of have to play the role of all right, let's sort of teach the player that at least in these games, that is not the way to act in these situations. You don't intentionally entice other players to kill you. You don't intentionally kill other players either. Find some way to ensure that this does not go down that path, right? And also, actually, another fun little thing I found out throughout all these games, as a Dungeon Master, if you give the party a companion, the companion should not be more powerful or more important than the party. They can have more of a connection to certain elements that give them some level of importance, but they should not, if they're traveling with the party, they should not be the ones taking all the glory. And big way to avoid that is having them separate from the party mid-mission, or having them not be as powerful as the rest of the party, and giving them a very simple list of attacks and commands and maneuvers that they can do, that you can just throw out as a DM, and have them play a supportive role in the fight. It's very tempting as a DM to essentially insert an NPC as a very powerful character to assist the party. But what it actually ends up doing is taking away the focus and the storytelling, the strength of storytelling from the players. So that's another thing I figured out rather quickly as a DM, just from my own experiences as a player. And I just thought I'd throw that tip out there because it's one that I feel like some DMs struggle with. If you're going to give your party a companion, don't let your companion be too powerful or outshine the players, because it defeats the purpose of the players being there in the first place. Eventually, I was invited to another D&D game, but this time we played online, which is new to me. I never played online. We started with Tabletop Simulator, and eventually we moved over to Roll20, which is the website that we currently use for all of our online games. And this game had a lot of characters that I played, that I made, that I really liked, including there was Alphadex Niloson, who was a drow gladiator. And he, drow, they live in the dark, and he was a slave gladiator forced to fight while the sun was high in a desert. So his skin was all wrinkled and burned, and his eyesight was poor, and he had a really rough voice. That I literally the voice was an attempt to mimic the ghouls from Fallout. And I would, before a game would start, make sure I had the right voice for Alphanex by going, "Hey, Spoolskin! Hey, Spoolskin! Hey, Spoolskin! Hey, Spoolskin! Hey, Spoolskin!" Like literally that, until eventually I had the voice for Alphanex, which was this rough, old, airy voice, because his throat was burned from all the sand, dust, sun that was literally burning him every day of his life. And that was fun until I realized I was hurting my throat doing that. So eventually I asked to change characters. And when I did, I changed to another character I really liked called Nathaniel Snade. Well, at the time he was just called Nathan, but eventually I retconned his name to Nathaniel because I thought Nathaniel was a cool name for this character. But Nathan Snade is and was a cowboy from another dimension, a steampunk dimension. So he came through a portal that brought him into this fantasy world, a world of science, and he came to a world of magic. And he had his pistol and his bullets and ammunition, which he could make, and it was just a lot of fun, playing a cowboy. And Snade's voice was a very poor attempt to mimic McCree from Orange. Not a very good mimic of McCree, but it was an attempt, and eventually evolved into its own thing that was further and further away from a McCree voice attempt. But that was the initial inspiration, because I chose cowboy because at the time the Overwatch Halloween event was on, and I was playing a lot of McCree in the Junkenstein's Revenge game mode. And I think that year he had the Vampire Hunter skin, which I thought was really cool. That he had it was like a cowboy vampire hunter. I thought that was a cool thing, so that's what I kind of went with in D&D. So those were two of my favorite characters. That game fizzled out because we had players play characters that constantly argued, and there was so much stress. And I learned quickly some things as a dungeon master that I would have done to help alleviate these stresses, and things as a player that I would have done. And one specific thing I have learned from that game, specifically fizzling out the way it did: communication. With your dungeon master, with your fellow players, or as a dungeon master with your players, communicate, always talk, always ask. I think so often we would constantly feel like we need to keep things secret because we wanted these big story and character reveals and awesome moments, or we had to, not offend each other by saying, "Hey, your character, we're not really jiving with that." Jiving? We're not really, I'm keeping that. We're not really, it's not really working. Like, do you mind switching, or at least changing the way you play the character? Being honest with your players, with how they play, because most often they want to play. And if you can't tell your players or your fellow players or your dungeon master, "Hey, you're doing this wrong," or "You're doing this in a way that we don't enjoy," not wrong, but for us, we're not enjoying this. Here's what we don't like. Can you change it? That is, if they can't take that criticism, there is very little point in playing with them anyway, because they're not going to provide you a game that you'll enjoy, regardless, right? If you're not enjoying the game and they refuse to admit that they're playing it in a way that you don't enjoy, and don't even want to try and figure out a way to make it fun, that's a lost cause. So always communicate, always be willing to communicate. And if someone is not willing to communicate back, or is wanting to fail to take any form of discussion, or even criticism, or even just discussion, not even criticism, just discussion about things, that is not great. You need to be able to discuss on these things, all right? Like any genuine adult relationship, personal, professional, you need to be able to communicate. So Dungeons and Dragons is no different. And I found that out because that game basically could have been salvaged, not even salvaged, saved, if we just all decided to talk and go, "Hey, this is rubbing me the wrong way. Thankfully, it was the game that ended and not like anyone's friendship. No one's friendship was ruined through that specific game. That Dungeon Master then started again and was invited all the same players back, and I played a half-orc fighter named Torok. And I loved Torok because he was just a dad. His whole thing was that he was searching for his missing wife and child who had to flee from a dictator king, and Torok stayed back to fight. And now that the fighting was over, he was now looking for his wife and child. And he didn't even know if he'd ever find them again. But he was like in his 40s, he had dreadlocks that were like graying, and he was like caring and kind and nice to all the other players. And I just had fun with this wholesome character. And I liked Torok, and I liked playing Torok. And you know, it's just fun playing a wholesome character sometimes. And one thing I found really fun about that game specifically was that Demon, who was one of the other characters, my friend Demon, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons with Demon Incursion. He played a high elf, no, sorry, a wood elf fighter. So we were both level 1 fighters. And we were so different because of our stats and because of our gear and because of the fighting styles we had. And it was this immediate, like, sort of eye-opening experience for me, where it was like, Fighter was like a class I didn't really touch all that much. And I was like, oh, Fighter is one of the most, like, versatile classes going. It was so cool to see two fighters in the party, and both of them be so different. And the needs of the party, or the needs of the party can be met in different ways by these two separate characters who were both the same class, even at level 1. That was so cool. Eventually, I switched character, played Titus again. He was like my go-to. I just liked playing Titus. Didn't quite work as well as I would have liked. But there was a really cool moment, and this is where I discovered the absolute nonsense that is in D&D 5e, Polar Master and Sentinel. You combine those two feats, and it is game-breaking, to the point where I know a lot of Dungeon Masters who do not allow you to have both of those feats at the same time. Because it essentially allowed me to solo a boss fight. A boss fight designed for all 3 players that were there to have to work together to beat. I fought him by myself as Titus and defeated him. The other 2 players fought him without my assistance and were defeated. And it was this moment of the tank / DPS who was Titus was not available. So the other 2 players, there was a 4th player who didn't make the session. So him not being there, and Titus not being in the second fight, and these 2 players, one was a rogue, the other was a warlock. The 2 of them didn't quite match up to this boss. So their DPS and tank not being available, especially because as a paladin, I was playing a paladin, I was a healer as well, so I couldn't heal them if they got hurt in that fight. So in my attempt to be egotistical and then succeeding in being egotistical, the rest of the party suffered. And part of it was because I had a combination of these abilities as a paladin. So I just kept smiting while using Polar Master and Sentinel to mess this guy up. Because this whole guy's thing was he was a martial artist, he was like a monk character. So I would step back, he would get within 10 feet, I would use my Sentinel ability and I would use the combination of my Polar Master ability with Sentinel to hit him and stop him in his tracks. He would be 10 feet away. And I would then hit him again with my second extra attack. Both times I was smiting. Every time I hit, I'd smite to add extra damage, stepped back further. He would step in. I'd hit him again with my reaction. And that repeated over and over again until I hit my last smite. And I got a nat 20 on my last roll. And I did enough damage to just completely clear out his hit points. It was really cool for me. not so cool for the rest of the party. Another lesson learned, moments of selfishness like that can sometimes be poor and bad. Also, as a dungeon master, in that moment, as a dungeon master, if I had to go back and criticize my DM at the time, having the monk be defeated by even one player, just in that moment, I would have turned around and gone, okay, you know what? The rest of the party isn't fighting. The points have been proven. They all get the rewards. They don't have to repeat the fight, because now you repeat the fight because, you know, I'm not going to force a warlock and a rogue to try and take on this super tough guy when the paladin is no longer available in the fight. Or I would allow Titus to join the fight again. Something like that, right? But just the way it was handled, not as great. And that's the thing, looking back at all these games, I'm realizing how much I've learned through these games, how much I have started to apply to my own games today. One last game I really want to touch on before I get into the games I'm playing at the moment is Belkanan, or Belkanan Returns, or Rises, I forget what I call it. But Belkanan was this epic story that I told over 2 years. The game went for 2 years. That's the longest any of my games have played or DM have ever gone, right? We had a 4-person party, turned to a 3-person party eventually, and I Dragon Ball Z'd myself because we were doing so well with all these characters, with all these arcs, and people were getting into it. And, you know, as players and as a dungeon master, we were all evolving and learning and having fun. The game was killed because the last arc that we ran, the last story arc, called the Necropolis arc, ran for twice as long as every other arc combined. It was basically half the game. So before we were jumping from location to location, this epic grand journey fighting the eldritch and demons and undead and going to undiscovered locations and ancient temples and revolutions and all these things happening. And the pace slowed right down for an investigation quest line that I should have cut into a quarter of its size. And the ending was nowhere near as satisfying to people as it should have been. And I also over-relied on one of my players. As a dungeon master, you often rely on a player to help. You know, you tell them some things, you're like, hey, I'm going to do this, this, and that. Can you do this, that? Or like use their backstory to help tell your main story. And eventually, I think it does cause an issue where it's like, well, okay, what are the rest of the players you can hear for? This one player is clearly the one that you care about. So that's a lesson I learned there. Shortening down that story, learning to read a room. But I would also argue that one of the things that I did was that I dared to try an investigation storyline, like to actually investigate, go and learn about people, go and study them, go and like, you know, figure out what's going on in this city, and, you know, try and catch the bad guy. So it was something I'd never done before. So in one way, I'm really happy with what I did, and I'm also really like look back and go, I wish there were a couple of things I changed. Belkanan ended after 2 years. We didn't get to the final part. Part of me almost feels like we could still revisit it eventually. So it's in the books. I still have everything I need to run the final few sessions of the game. So who knows? I might be able to run Belkanan and actually give that story an ending. But the best part about Belkanan was actually there was a one-shot that I ran. And it was meant to be, and a one-shot in D&D is like a single session, one session, right? It was meant to be a one-shot. And it evolved into like 6 sessions. And the idea was it was the revolution of Stonehelm. One of my player characters was Alaman Luft. He was a bard. He was a half-elf. And he had a whole bunch of things with his family. He came from a place called Stonehelm. And Stonehelm recently had its king killed in a raid by the orcs. And the king had his son, his banished son, returned, saying that I have rightful heir to the throne. The king's banished son returned, saying I am a rightful heir to the throne. Even though I was banished, I have more of a right than my sister, because my sister is a half-elf, and it is these dirty non-humans who are at fault for what has happened to this great city. I'm a full-blooded human. Stonehelm was for humans, but no one else. And it started this whole, kicking people out of their homes and sending them to the streets and pushing them out of Stonehelm and turning Stonehelm into for the human race and for no one else. So elves, dragonborn, halflings, gnomes, whatever, they had to be gone. So Alaman Luft and his mother, who was a full-blooded elf, and a bunch of the non-humans and a bunch of humans who disagreed with this mentality all banded together in a revolution. And the revolution was so much fun for them. And I could not have been happier that we had more sessions doing this, because I got to play the bad guy, Amron Barrack, who I will actually say a previous player from a previous game made Amron Barrack as his player character. And Amron, I was actually going to have that player come in and play Amron in a future game, in this game, have him be a special guest, play the villain, have a player be on the DM side as a villain. Didn't turn out that way. So if I had permission to still use the character, and he said, yeah, go ahead, sure. I said, great. So I got to take this character and really mess around with someone else's design for this game. I actually thought that was a fun little exercise. How do I role play this character that someone else has made and already role played before? How do I copy that? I thought that was a fun exercise, and Amron was so fun to play. There was this one moment where Alaman was using disguise self to hide and disguise himself as a guard, and he was trying to snoop out some information. He walked into a room, and the King Amron Barrack was there, and Amron was smoking his way a cigar. And Amron walked past Alaman dressed as a guard and saw him and went, "No, you. I recognise you. Are you new?" It's like, yes, I'm new. I only just joined. Yeah. Times are tough. These revolutionaries, these rebels, they stop at nothing to destroy this race. Are you ready for that? Are you tough enough to deal with this threat? Are you tough enough to defend Stone? Yeah. This guy, the element was like, yes, I'm tough enough. I'm strong enough. Really. And he takes a cigar, and thinking that this was chainmail that the guard was wearing. Disguise self makes you look like you're wearing chainmail. It made him look like you're wearing chainmail, but Alan wasn't wearing chainmail. So, taking his cigar, he puts it on the guard's chest and twists it, to put it out on the chainmail, just to mess with the guard, to sort of tease him, sort of intimidate him, because Amron was a terrible person like that. Alaman had to roll a Constitution check and just braved it. Just don't make it look. There's a cigar being put out of my chest. That really hurts. Amron, his cigar. Welcome to the winning team, kid. And then he looks at his assistant folks and they walk off. And Alaman walks out and immediately is like, drops to the skies. There's a huge burn there. It was a great moment of tension, because if Alaman failed that Constitution check, they would have immediately known something was up. So there was this great moment of tension, and I have regrets about the Belkanan Rising game, but I have no regrets about the Stonehelm Revolution game, which they did end up winning. They actually won the revolution. They succeeded. So yeah, that was one of my favorites. I almost want to consider Stonehelm Revolution a separate game, and therefore one of the other campaigns I've finished. About 6 or 7 sessions long. It was great. I loved it. That's pretty much all the games worth mentioning from my past. But I have a bunch of games in my present that I'm a part of, and I just want to touch base on all those. I'm Dungeon Master in 2 games. I've got one game that is a one-on-one campaign called The Unlikely Trio, and that is with me and Demon. Demon is a great player, and I've specifically built this because I really just want to Dungeon Master and work on this this world that I've been creating and have been expanding upon for years. Like, most of my games are set in this same setting, and I love expanding upon and retconning and evolving ideas. And Demon's a perfect player to do that with, because he's such a good role player. But for Demon, it also gives him a chance to play some characters that he doesn't usually get a chance to play. And a one-on-one campaign like this is actually a lot of fun. Like I think it's maybe an underrated way to play role-playing games is a one-on-one thing, a DM and a player, because it opens up a lot of creative opportunities. And I think more people should try it. I think if anyone out there is dungeon mastered or played, and wants to dungeon master, wants to play, you talk to someone and go, hey, do you want to do a one-on-one game? Because it does open up a bunch of creative avenues, and you can work the game a bit differently, and you can be a little more focused with a game like that. And you actually, as a DM, start to learn how to read your player. You start to learn how to read your player character. You know, and if you do it right, your player's going to be invested in their character and their story. And the other thing is that you only need to rely on one other person showing up, and you only need to rely on that one player being invested. It's a one-on-one game. It's very easy to get them invested, is what I'm trying to get at. So it's easy to get them invested, easy to set up sessions. It changes the dynamic, but it's still D&D. So I'm loving that one-on-one game. We're about to do the second chapter. I'm working on that. I actually have a Word document open right now for that second chapter. We also have a game called Thro Kalim Mercenary Company. Thro Kalim, Demon is the dungeon master for that. We have 4 players in the game, and we're playing mercenaries working for a dwarven mercenary company. And I, being a cheeky rascal, decided to play a drow. Because the dwarves and the drow don't get along at all, and I thought that'd be fun. Her name is Kjornil Kilt de Virikai, and she is a very soft-spoken, very well presented. She's not timid. She's just, you know, not even standoffish. She's just very, very soft and gentle. Except she's also a hunter and a murderer and merciless when she needs to be, and cruel because she's a drow, and that's just, in this world, that's part of drow culture, is cruelty. And she somehow ended up the de facto party leader. I'd say that, actually. I mean, I say that. Maybe one of my fellow players from the game might see this podcast and go, hey, you said you were party leader. We didn't vote on that. So, you know, put an asterisk on the party leader thing. But I love playing Kjornil. I love the fact I'm playing Ranger for the first time ever. I've never played a Ranger before. And I am now on the side of Ranger is good. It's just that Beastmaster isn't. And it's put a very dark stain on the Ranger class forever. People are always going to look down on Ranger until they actually play Ranger properly, because it is a very good class with a lot of great abilities and consistent damage. And I have gotten, I think, the most kills out of the party so far. So yeah, this is a party, mind you, with a paladin. So, you know, that's a lot of damage from one of the other players. Yeah, I'm loving playing Kjornil. I'm loving this game. We're about to enter chapter 2 of that game as well, actually, the second portion of the game. I am also dungeon mastering a in-person game that's been on hiatus, but I love the players in this game. I love the characters they play, and I really want to start picking up the amount of sessions we do. I originally aimed for once a month, and things just kept happening. COVID, obviously, is an issue. But also, you know, one of our players is a stage performer. They do a bunch of plays. One of my other players used to actually be my boss. He's a manager at a 24-hour convenience store, so he's pretty busy a lot of the time. And one of my other players is now also a manager at a supermarket. So, like, busy again. So we have a lot of busy people. Don't know if I can really increase session times. I need to talk to these guys and go, hey, are you guys like still interested? Because I am. It's just really hard to set out sessions. Sorry. But I love love those players, love them as people, love them as players, and I love their characters. So I really do hope we can get some more sessions in because it is left in a, you know, we've got so much that we've still got to do, so much left planned in that game. Got a game coming up, run by a different friend, and it's a goblin-only game. We're all playing goblins. I've never played a game before, but we all have to play one class or one race. So we're all playing goblins. And I've made a character called Gorox the Unclean, and I love Gorox. The whole idea is he used to be a little timid goblin named Pebbles. And Pebbles was like he was afraid of the other goblins because they were so much bigger than him. And he was bossed around and told to do things. Pebbles, go fetch the drinks. Pebbles, go do this. And eventually he just wanted to be treated with respect. So Pebbles, he went out one day looking for treasure, thinking if he brought back some nice shinies from others, he would be treated with respect. And that didn't quite happen, because what happened was Pebbles found a very special shiny in the wild, in this old sunken mansion. He touched it, and it shocked him. And Pebbles was lying on the ground, and he went to sleep. And in his place stood Gorox. And Gorox was not a timid goblin. He did not walk with a hunchback. He was not frightened easily. Gorox returned to the other goblins, and they knew something was wrong. He was changed. He was corrupted. He was poisoned. But they didn't quite have a word to describe it, so they simply took to calling him something they whispered, hissed under their breath as they saw him walk by. Unclean. Unclean. He is unclean. I'm really going to enjoy playing him. No sessions have been set in stone yet. We've only just finished making our characters, but I'm so excited to play him. And all of that is a very, like a semi-detailed rundown of my 15 years of playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's been a lot. And I have loved just about every moment of it. There have been some bad, moments, games ending where they shouldn't, arguments between friends. But ultimately, everything that has happened, I wouldn't really necessarily change. Like, I know there's some things I could go back and go, hey, you kind of don't do that, stop that bad DMing. But I only know these things now because I made the mistakes as both a player and a dungeon master, or saw other players and dungeon masters making them. And I suppose, I guess in that sense, maybe a mold to be taken from this collection of stories is, one, don't take the games too seriously. Obviously, put effort into it. Especially if you're a player and your dungeon master is putting time and effort into making these games, put some effort into it for your dungeon master. Make up for the effort that they are putting into it. But don't take it so seriously that it starts to become a chore or a hassle or no longer fun. But more importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes as either a DM or a player. And don't get flustered if you do. You're human. And this is a thing where you are doing things on the fly. Like, the Dungeons and Dragons can be stuff just constantly happening around you, especially if you're a dungeon master where you are constantly having to manage multiple players. You can make mistakes, and games will not be ruined. You can flub storytelling elements, and the story will still be good, going forward. As a player, you can make a decision that you don't feel was quite right for your character or for the party or the story or whatever. Make those decisions, make those mistakes, learn from them. Don't be like, the game is ruined forever. Just learn. Communicate with your fellow players and your dungeon master. Always remember that the dungeon master is a player as well. He or she is there to have fun. So your dungeon master is also there to enjoy themselves. So don't treat them poorly or any separately from the players. Communicate with them like you would your players. Dungeon masters communicate with your players like you would if you were a player. And just have fun. Just enjoy the game. You know, everyone enjoys D&D for a different reason. I like storytelling. So I enjoy sessions where I get to do character-driven storytelling. If a session of D&D is me and my fellow players sitting around a campfire just talking for 3 hours, I will happily do that because I enjoy the character storytelling. Because that campfire session where we share our life stories and learn about each other is going to make, in 3 sessions time, where one of my fellow players, his character, is about to die, it's going to make that feel so much more important because I know what that character's been through. And I know that my character feels a connection with them. So I'm going to put my life on the line to save them. And it makes, you know, character death important. It makes survival feel more important. It makes the story feel more impactful. And, you know, then if you as a player, and this is something I feel like is important, if you and a fellow player's character, if your two characters get along and they like each other, and then this character here has an emotional, character-driven plot point that includes their backstory, that's going to matter to them. It's also going to matter to you because you are invested in this character and this player. So you're invested in this as well. So I feel like it's really important to remember to invest yourself in other players as well. There's so much I could talk about. I could go so much longer talking about this. But I think I'll actually end it there. There is plenty of time for me to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games further in the future. So many stories that I could tell that will come to my brain after I finish recording and go, oh, I should have shared that story. But this is just a little peek into this wild, wonderful world that I have fallen in love with, without going into the gruesome detail that I really actually like doing as both a player and a dungeon master. So thank you for joining me today. I hope that these stories I regaled you with were entertaining. I hope maybe some of my stories, even if you are interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons or already do, and you know, there are certain things I've said here that maybe resonate with you. That's good. I hope maybe I've said something near the end here that makes you go, oh, you know what? That's true. I might consider that moving into the next story. And if you do play Dungeons and Dragons, or any other role-playing game for that matter, let me know. Comment in this video. I would love to hear your stories. I would love to hear about people's experiences, the good and even the bad. I would love to hear about people's role-playing games and their characters and their stories and their lore. It gives me life. It's something I love doing. So please, if you do, comment down below. Let me know. Tell me. And I will absolutely reply to you because I live for this sort of thing. And you know what? If you don't and you don't wish to comment, that's fine. I'm glad you joined today. I'm glad you came along for this journey. So I don't really think I have anything else to say, except, well, sad to see you go, traveler, but thank you for staying at the Champions Way Tavern. I hope you have safe travels and you find good food, riches, and a warm bed by the end of your day. Take care of yourself. This is warm ginger ale, and it tastes strange. It's been here for a while.